Just going to give this a couple seconds. Okay, I think we're good. This is the Monks and Mavericks podcast. Today we're going to be going down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole and interviewing one of my favorite presenters, Kat from Truth Factory. One of the things that sets her apart from some of the other conspiracy theory channels that are out there is she does actual research, and that doesn't just mean reading Wikipedia articles and watching other videos that people have produced and regurgitating that. But I'm going to let her kind of introduce herself a little bit further, and then we're going to go down that rabbit hole. Kat, do have you?
Thanks for having me on your podcast. My name is Kat, or Truth Kat. I started with the Truth Factory channel in 2017, I believe, just making some videos on some government conspiracies, some corruption, some comedy videos as well that lean libertarian or right-leaning. And I did that all the way up to this month of 2023 until I was, I guess last month I was deleted from YouTube. So I've now moved on to Rumble. And that's, I guess, my introduction there.
Okay. So we'll go through and make sure that your Rumble channel and all that is tagged below, and we'll be posting this up on Rumble and then all our other social media feeds. So about how many videos had you done before your channel was taken down, and how many strikes and kind of all that stuff?
Well, I know that I had over 150 videos, so it's probably somewhere in that ballpark. And I had no strikes on my channel. I had one warning on my channel for I don't even know if I'm allowed to say these words anymore, like a Pizzagate video that I had done. I had a warning for that. I had 0 strikes, and at 12:30 a.m. I received an email that said my channel had been permanently removed. I went to appeal that decision, and it was immediately denied. After some digging, I finally got to talk to a customer service representative from YouTube who said that they would go with policy experts to review my channel thoroughly. That took about 2 weeks. And within those 2 weeks, I got, I think it was about 4 or 5 videos that they had flagged, and all of them were on FBI corruption, elite pedophiles, and ironically, internet censorship. That they had said that we can't tolerate this on YouTube. So they took down my channel, and then they tried to find a reason afterwards to justify removing me. But I think the real reason why is I had come out with a January 6th video, and I was naming what seemed to be undercover federal agents by name. And I assume that that had something to do with the removal of my channel.
The you being censored for having for talking about FBI collusion and censorship of big tech is fascinating. So let's just backtrack a little bit. And how did we even get onto the conspiracy theory kind of topic? How did you wind up being brought into that?
Okay, it's actually kind of an interesting story. Like many women in their early 20s, kind of when I started down the rabbit hole, I leaned left. Like I was fairly liberal, but not super political. And definitely wasn't into American politics at the time. I went to school for nursing, and my first patient was in a dementia ward, and she had some signs of PTSD. And so I looked into her file, into her history, and I found out she was something called a Duplessis orphan. And I had to go home and research that. And once I started that, I couldn't go back. I made a full-length, basically a documentary about the Duplessis orphans and MK Ultra in Canada, and it's a true story, and it's terrifying. And it has to do with the Canadian government colluding with the Catholic Church in the 1940s to traffic not only traffic children, but to put children into these orphanages, and then they would change the allocation of these orphanages to asylums, and they would rubber stamp all of these children as being mentally deficient. And once they were patients now, not orphans. And once they're patients, they could perform medical experimentation on them And since they didn't have legal parents, there was no one to consent for them or speak for them. So a lot of these children were given lobotomies and tortured and used in just awful drug experiments. Many of them died at the hands of the Catholic Church. Many were abused in so many ways. And many of the survivors of that never received compensation. We don't even learn about that in school. This was the first that I'd ever heard about this travesty of thousands of children when I was in college. And I was like, I can't go back to just being normal now. I went down this rabbit hole, and that's kind of where that journey started for me.
It's interesting. A lot of Canadians, just for everyone that doesn't know, I'm Canadian and Kat is also Canadian. A lot of Canadians don't realize how much funding from the universities comes from American government projects. I grew up in Saskatchewan, and we had this one teacher in high school. She's a bit of an odd duck, and she said, when you go to university, don't ever volunteer for psych experiments. And then going through and finding out later that like some of the experiments with LSD and stuff like that were being done at the University of Regina during her time was fascinating.
Well, even with the Duplessis orphan experiments, in the video that I made about it, it was called the Great Darkness, because that's what they called that period of time in Quebec, the Great Darkness, under the Premier Maurice Duplessis. It was the same hospitals where they were doing these experiments on children that would eventually be funded by the American CIA to perform MK Ultra. So I really think that it was a stepping stone for all of that. And I honestly believe that they're still doing things like that to this day. I mean, they were doing it then. No one really apologized. They kind of just covered it up. They burnt some files and destroyed them. So we really don't have all the documents on MK Ultra. But how do we know what's going on now? And I think there's people like me who like to dig through and will file freedom of information requests from the government to find out what kind of corruption is happening. But other than that, the mainstream media doesn't do that. And that makes you wonder, well, why doesn't the mainstream media look into any of this, right? Because we don't have a free press anymore. We have a controlled press.
$600 million that the current government gave to the Canadian media?
Yeah, guess how much of that I got? None. Yeah, it makes you wonder, right? $600 million. I think that could be considered subverting democracy.
So when you come across people that think that it's all just a bunch of horse shit, how do you handle that?
Well, I wish it was. Wouldn't that just be easier if we could all just take the blue pill and go back to sleep? That would be nice. I would love it if that was all made up, but unfortunately it's not. And my research stems from usually direct sources, if I can get them. That's the best, is eyewitnesses, direct sources for this information. Freedom of information requests. If I can get my hands on leaked government documents, I'll do that through various sources. I don't say anything that I can't back up, or at least I try not to. And if I do, then I say, you know, this is just my opinion, or it seems like we can connect the dots here to say that this might be happening. But everything has to be rooted in truth and fact. And I do my best to make sure that I'm getting everything right. And honestly, I'll say that I think I have quite a bit better of a batting average than the mainstream media at this point.
Yeah, it's it definitely, the last couple of years have been quite telling, I guess, because this isn't going up on COVID or on YouTube. We can go through and look at the timeline on COVID and how quickly the narratives are changing and things like that.
Well, and from day one with COVID, I was right. I was making video about how it was a lab leak, and I had gone through all the documents from China, everything that I could find. I went through the reports that said that the first person infected with COVID-19 had no association with that wet market. That's what they were pushing at the time. I had a friend in China translate emails that the doctor from the Wuhan lab was sending out. I got it. I think I got everything with that bang on, or pretty close to it at the time, and that was something that would have got me. It was very close to getting me canceled by YouTube then.
Well, and going through and with good old Uncle Elon buying Twitter and then just putting out there in the open for everyone to see. Yeah, here's the document. Here's the back and forth of the FBI, etc., asking for these things to be downregulated or be able to be banned and stuff like that, right?
Well, and it's naive to think that Twitter is the only company where that's happening. That has to be happening to YouTube. I'm sure that's why I got banned, because I was talking about January 6th. You know, every major social media company is controlled by, I'm sure, a 3-letter agency. We know when Edward Snowden leaked all those documents to WikiLeaks, there was what was it called, Prism, where basically the NSA could spy on everyone through social media. Like, it's been happening for years. So of course they're controlling it. And I'm sure they're controlling the media too. And they're sending out documents that say, this is what you're allowed to say. This is what you're not allowed to say. This is who's getting canceled. Because that's what we found out with Twitter. So like, why would that be any different with Facebook or YouTube or Instagram?
Yeah, and I mean, what's interesting about Facebook specifically is the majority of people that are using Facebook use it under a real name, or somebody goes through and uses like real first name, middle name, or something like that. So when you go through and you start looking into things as far as investigations, you wind up doing something called link analysis. Facebook gets people to do link analysis for them. It's honestly a Stasi officer's wet dream.
Well, I did a video on Facebook years ago, and I kind of came to the conclusion, or the evidence heavily pointed to Facebook being a DARPA experiment, because there was a program that DARPA was creating called LifeLog, and the day after they said that they got rid of LifeLog, Facebook popped up, and it had all the same things. It's like, how could we get the average citizen to give us all their information, right? Okay, we're going to make a social media platform.
Well,
It's
and
honestly brilliant. It's evil, though. It's like an evil genius thing.
It's fascinating because people are self-informing and updating locations and stuff like that, sometimes hourly.
Well, and there was also experiments, psychological experiments that were going on within Facebook, and you can verify all of this with a quick internet search, that at one point, Facebook was trying to see if they could affect the mood of their users by influencing what they saw on their timeline, whether it was positive or negative, and they found out that they could. And they were doing that without the consent of the users. So isn't that kind of interesting that they're doing psychological experiments with us, or they have at least?
Well, I mean, it's been said that nothing's free, right? So if you're using a service for free, finger quotes, they're getting something out of it, right? Whether it's
we are the product.
Exactly, right? Whether that's going through and getting your browsing history, or just passive tracking, or getting geotags, or whatever that is. So a lot of times people wind up talking about there's this constant chatter about the algorithm. Do you think that an algorithm has created more echo chambers and has just gone through and kind of created further polarization? Do you think that that's been done intentionally, or it's just simply a matter of people are being shown things that are like what they like, so that they click more and stay on the app?
That's an interesting question. I think, though, if you're shown something that you don't like, you're more likely to comment on that if you don't like it because you disagree. And you would think,
rage porn.
yeah, and you would think then, okay, the algorithm should show you more things that you don't like because it thinks that this is something you're engaging with, right? Because that's what the algorithm is designed to do. It's designed to keep you engaged and on the platform longer, so it can show you more ads and make more money. So if anything, I would hope that the algorithm would be showing you probably the contrarian view to whatever you're into. But I do think that blacklisting is real. I think that throttling is real. If you see someone who's been on a channel or like on YouTube for a long time, but they've kind of hit, a threshold where their subscribers aren't growing the same way anymore, you have to think, okay, there is probably something going on there of them being throttled because they don't fit the right narrative and they're not quite big enough of a channel. They're not like the Ben Shapiro's or the Steven Crowder's, where they actually might have a little bit of sway with YouTube, where they have enough supporters where if they're taken off, then there's going to be an uproar. But if you're like a channel like mine with, 150,000 subscribers, you go missing, no one cares. Or not enough people care to make a wave because I'm just one of, really thousands and thousands that have been canceled.
So people can appreciate what it means when, as a content creator, you have your channel cut. So 150,000 subscribers. How long did it take you to build that up?
So I started that in 2017. And it built fairly quickly. I was actually really surprised at how receptive everyone was. And then I had some personal health problems and family health problems, and I had a child, and my production slowed down significantly. And I honestly think that's why I was allowed to keep my channel for so long, is because I wasn't producing enough content to get canceled when the first wave of everyone else was getting deleted, and I survived that. I think it's just because I just had taken some time off. But then as soon as I came back and started making more content, okay, now I'm gone. So it was only a matter of time, and I knew that. Things were shifting, and I had talked about that in many videos since the beginning. When Alex Jones was kicked off, I said, okay, there's a lot of people who don't like what Alex Jones has to say, but this is going to be the slippery slope, and I have to defend him because it's only a matter of time before it's me. And who's going to be left to defend me? No one, because everyone else is going to be kicked off. And that's exactly what's happened. I called it. I knew it never stops with one person, right? It always keeps going because that's how totalitarianism works. And soon, all that's going to be left on those platforms, it will be an echo chamber. That's what they want, I believe, in the end.
Let's say a lot of it is, right? And you wind up going through and seeing like what they call the wolf warriors and stuff like that out of China, where you wind up seeing mass flagging. It's not even bots; they're just literally using basically boiler rooms full of people, cubicle rooms full of people, just to go through and mass flag videos and stuff like that on that's anti-China. You see that on YouTube, guys, content creators getting strikes. So you said you had 150 videos.
It was somewhere around there. I think it was 153.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a lot. That's a lot of hours to put into something, because you have to think, okay, well, 100. Some of those videos I put over 100 hours into. It was a long passion project, and I can tell you, YouTube didn't pay me hardly anything. Any money that I made from making it was through private donations, and it was more of a labor of love than a job, I would say.
So it'd be fair to say that when that channel got canceled, it's not just boohoo, an influencer lost their channel. It's you lost 15,000 or to 20,000 hours of work that you've done.
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, I do have a backup on BitChute for most of my content, and I still have the hard copies, so it's not like those are gone. And it's just more sad because I was doing it to get it out there, and I knew that this was a place where people could come and hear the truth, and I put so much work into that. And yeah, it does suck to see that gone. It's like, I mean, they can't take away my 100,000 subscriber plaque, at least, but they canceled me. And not only did they cancel that channel, they went and deleted a channel I started when I was 17. That was just not political at all. It was just a private channel with jokes and comedy and things like that. They deleted that. That's how dangerous of a person I am. I'm a mom from Canada, who uses a cat avatar. And that is just so dangerous that I can't exist on their platform because I was calling Bill Gates a pedophile, I guess.
I think in some ways that's part of the charm of what you do, is because there's a certain amount of just like humor and lightheartedness, sarcasm, and snide remarks. It makes it a lot more palatable than say an Alex Jones type of yelling at the camera.
Well, I mean, there's a time and place for that too. And I actually think Alex Jones is like a quite a good entertainer as a pundit, but I know he's not everyone's cup of tea. But yeah, I try to make it a little bit lighthearted, and a lot of times I'm dealing with some heavy topics where that's hard. You know, we're dealing with some serious issues, so it's like, okay, am I going to make a joke about how this guy's name is Dick Luger and like, you know, yeah,
Well,
okay, I will make
you
that
might as
joke.
well, right? Like,
Yeah, and not everything lands, but I do my best. I mean, I was I was working in medicine, and on the side I was writing comedy, just various comedy writing, including like for YouTube scripts and things like that. And I got to a point where it's like, why don't I just make my own channel? Like, why am I making other people money with my talent? Why not just do it myself? And I was also trying to get into politics at the time, and I just couldn't find anything that interested me. I like to watch videos because I find that that information is nice and quick and I can absorb. And I just couldn't find anything that wasn't, you know, some guy talking into the camera for 2 hours about a topic. And I'm just like, okay, I want to learn something in under 15 minutes. And I'm like, okay, maybe this is a niche that I can do. And so that's how it started. It started with like, okay, I'm going to make videos where I explain this topic in 5 minutes. But then quickly that became like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And then I was that guy talking in front of a camera for 2 hours. But um, some things just can't be done in that short of time when you're dealing with complex topics. And over time too, I got better and better at video editing and production, and it became a bit of an art for me. It became an outlet.
well, and I like you go through and I actually earlier today rewatched your on Rumble, your piece on the Duplicity orphans, and it's fantastic. The editing is great. The presentation of it's great. Right, like it stands on its own as far as a quality and just production value.
Well, I appreciate it. I think that was the first one where it's like, okay, this is maybe I'm actually doing something important here. Because, you know, I went and I interviewed victims of these, you know, of the trafficking, of the experiments, of the orphanages. I'm like, this is a really important story. And it's really sad that, you know, like someone who is just like, yeah, an internet cat is the one to kind of break this open like this. Like, there just wasn't a lot of information about that. And I'm like, this is a huge, huge story that almost no one knows about. So it's like, why am I having to do, you know, like you think that there'd be more than just me doing that, but it kind of comes down to, well, no, there isn't anyone doing this besides, you know, these fringe independent journalists like myself who are getting kicked off of these platforms for telling the truth. It's sad.
Yeah, you, Project Veritas. There's a few others,
Well,
but
look at Project Veritas, how they're treated by by the mainstream media and by social media. They're getting strikes and flagged, and they're doing real journalism. That's the price of doing real journalism, and that shows you how controlled these companies are. And it's not just by the government, it's by big pharma, it's by big tech, it's by the members of WEF. That's who controls the world, that's who controls the narrative.
how much of it do you think is consciously driven by, Pfizer, Moderna, right, Merck Frost, um, other big kind of corporations? How much of it do you think is directly driven versus just media companies looking at in terms of, we want those sweet advertising dollars, and us doing an expose on something that matters? Well, we're right, like 3M or DuPont probably is not going to want to spend advertising dollars with us if we just did a giant, takedown of them.
Well, I'm sure money is the root of all of it, right? But these people all shake hands at Davos. You have Google shaking hands with Pfizer. They all work together. There's about 2,000 people who all control the world, and they don't want the other 8 billion of us to realize that. So whether it's directly or indirectly, it has the same outcome of censorship. And that's the problem. And there's no laws about it because they're under the guise of private companies, when we all know that the government is utilizing the stance of them being private companies to get around certain laws, right? Because the First Amendment isn't, private companies don't have to be accountable for any of that. They can censor you all they want, even though, in my opinion, I believe that these social media platforms are the new digital public square. And hopefully one day the law catches up to that. But until then, they can do whatever they want. And I guess we just have to rely on independent platforms and hope that there'll be a space for the truth.
I guess the other side of it is, does the law want to catch up to that?
Not the current one. No, and that's why they have to keep certain politicians out. In my opinion, I think there is a concerted effort to manipulate our democracy so they can keep the same players in play that go along with what big pharma and the big banks and what WEF wants and what they're planning. I think those are the companies like BlackRock that actually control the world.
Good old Larry Fink.
Yeah, a lot of people don't even know his name, and they should. He's probably the most powerful man in the world, honestly. He
He
controls over, I
controls a
think,
portfolio of, what is it, 9,
I
10
think
trillion?
$10 trillion the last I checked. It's basically the GDP of many small countries
Combined, many small countries.
combined. Yeah, absolutely. And his power is terrifying. He's also very left-leaning. He invests a lot in left-leaning politicians, and he's a big member. He's on the board of directors of the World Economic Forum. So he's a globalist. He wants the same things that they want. He wants us to live in pods. He wants us to eat the bugs. And that's not a weird conspiracy theory I'm making up. If you watch my video called "The Men Who Own Everything" on Rumble or BitChute, you'll see that the World Economic Forum is actually obsessed with us eating insects. But yeah, and in their trip to Davos, they're all on private planes and they're eating the most expensive Wagyu steaks from Japan. They're not eating bugs, but they want us to. It's just hypocrisy at its finest.
It's interesting to see how the kind of trickle down effects and stuff like that happen. Are you familiar with a guy named Tim Ferriss?
I'm not.
So Tim Ferriss wrote the 4-Hour Work Week, 4-Hour Body, had a fairly well-known podcast. Tools of Titans stuff. There's a few others that he wrote, and Tim winds up doing these kind of dives into different topics. And if someone doesn't know anything about those topics, you think that Tim is brilliant. But if you know something about those topics, you wind up realizing that Tim's just an idiot, and he would be insufferable to actually be friends with. But he had a very well-known podcast. And so going through and looking at some of his advertisers a while back, like this is maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, he actually started advertising a cricket protein bar. And
Okay, yep.
he was the first one I had seen that was talking about in the West, actually marketing the eating of bugs, right? As, oh, it's lean and it's this and so on and so forth. That was interesting. On the topic of eating bugs, about 80% of the world does it already. Like spending a bit of time in Mexico, there's places where, they're basically like ants and stuff like that, or crickets. They fry them up, and they wind up being like popcorn. I'm not saying that we should eat bugs. I'm just saying lots of people do already.
Yeah, and I think that's fine if you are making that conscious choice, or if that is the only option that you have. What I don't like is world elites telling us what to do and what we need to be doing, because why are they the moral arbiters? Obviously, they're controlled by crony capitalism and what's going to make them money, and they're investing in these alternatives that they're then forcing onto us via their policies, and they're using like climate fear porn in order to justify that. But you notice that they're always well invested into these alternative energy sources and alternative fertilizers well before they start cracking down on the laws and trying to implement their agenda on everyone else. It's just, I already have heard the story that they're already putting cricket protein into flour and things like that in products, and people are already eating it, and it's not labeled that you're eating crickets or bugs. And I think that's pretty shady business practice. So it's like, why are they doing it? Why do they want us to eat bugs?
Have you heard anything about bug farms that already exist in North America?
Yeah, there's some in our lovely province. There's factories that are supposedly putting it into animal food, like dog food and things like that. But how long until that switches over for human consumption, right?
Absolutely. I'm interested to kind of where it happened for you. For myself, I kind of started questioning things as a child, partly because I was that annoying little kid that my dad would tell me something and I'd be like, well, but why? Okay, but why? And just always had questions about everything, probably because I'm a little bit on the spectrum or something like that. And so I was born in the early 80s, and I watched Ruby Ridge, and I watched Waco, and I watched Oklahoma City and 9/11, and I watched it all on TV. And during the 90s, kind of pre 9/11, the big kind of hot topic was there's these survivalists, and they're in Idaho, and they're, the Michigan militia, and they're in Montana. And so I grew up watching them be demonized and kind of, they think that there's going to be this pandemic and this government control and this takeover, and try to going through and seeing and just kind of laying it all out as, well, they're white supremacists and they're extremists and they're that, the Turner Diaries and all that. A guy named Kurt Saxon, who was fairly well known in that scene at the time. I actually wound up talking to him on the phone when I was probably 12 years old. And so for me, kind of watching all that stuff shift and all that kind of theater, and then as I kind of watched 9/11 and then started seeing all of these things start to change, it made me look back and kind of realize, okay, this has kind of always been a bit of a puppet show. So my question for you is, when is it that you think that they stopped doing actual journalism?
Oh, that's a good question. Because I think back at like real journalists that are people I consider real journalists, like Seymour Hersh and what's that? Gary Webb. Gary Webb was murdered because they said he was suicided. He was the one who exposed the Contra missions and the crack funneling into the American Black communities in the 80s and early 90s. And he was found committed suicide. I believe he had 2 bullet holes in the back of his head. And they said that was a suicide. So I think if you're dumb enough like me to do real journalism, yeah, then you're not going to last very long. And I don't know how long. I don't even know if real journalism. I don't know when it ended and when it began. I know that Project Mockingbird started quite a long time ago, though, and that's where the CIA was hiring people to work in the media so that way they can control the narrative. People like probably Anderson Cooper. If you check out his Wikipedia page, you'll see that he started in the CIA with a CIA program, and then immediately afterwards he was working as a journalist without any formal education. It just makes you go, okay, that's interesting.
Isn't his mom? I thought he came from one of the big fashion companies. His family.
Gloria Vanderbilt, yes, very, very wealthy. And so it's like, why is he a news anchor? He could do anything. Yeah, I think he's an obvious CIA plant. And, someone who isn't a conspiracy theorist might be listening to me and I sound insane. And I probably, before I took the red pill and got into all of this, I would have listened to someone like me and be like, that person's crazy. Like Alex Jones is crazy. But when you start reading the documents, you start reading the books, you start getting into it, you realize, okay, no, there's actually something here and it's terrifying. And you can't go back. I can never go back to sleep, so to speak, and just be normal. I've been changed forever with the things that I've read and the things that I've seen and the people that I've talked to over the years of doing the Truth Factory.
Well, and I guess for me, one of the things that's kind of interesting about social media and the effects on what's allowed to go on in the narrative, there's a few news anchors, I guess, that have made some statements. I think his name was Brian. He was an American news anchor, and he was talking about being under sniper fire. Or there's this whole thing, and there's this charade about it. And then people on social media came together and said, well, yeah, that actually didn't happen. And he was forced to go back and apologize because he was caught in this giant lie. I'm going to have to look it up, and then I'll post in the show notes below. His name was Brian something. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Okay. I'll post in the notes below. So you wind up going through and actually getting people are able to push back on stuff because they're like, okay, well, that's not true, because you can have a bunch of people watching this story. And it used to be, like grown up in small town Saskatchewan, wind up seeing something happened in New York City. New York City might as well have been, the other side of the planet, might as well have been another planet because it was so far away. And now I talk to people in New York City every day. So
yeah, the internet has connected us in so many ways, and I think it's also helped spread the truth so fast, right? I can make a video, or I used to be able to before I was canceled, and within a few days I could be at 50,000 views. I could have reached 50,000 people with what was actually going on. I would record calls with Pfizer. Anyone who doubted me, it's like, okay, just pick up the phone and call people and ask. Just do basic journalism. It's not hard. Just do it. Because if you can't, well, okay, I did it for you. Now just watch and listen, and here you go. Like, you can't dispute that when it's coming out of the mouth of a Pfizer representative. Like, this is what the company believes. This is what they're saying. Here it is. But I think, like, if we had the internet and the platforms that we have now back during 9/11, I would have been canceled then for saying, okay, these things don't add up. Let's look at building number 7. Let's, the things that we can talk about now about 9/11. At the time, we would have been censored in the same way. They would say, we got fact checkers on this, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I've done a bit of work with explosives, and you go through and you look at some of that stuff, you're like, not like the person that set that up was really, really, really good at what they did. Like really good at what they did. You look at building 7, right, to have a building fall in on itself like that, like just the absolute precision and the engineering that would have gone into that blast, just incredible, right?
Yeah, but like, we're just not allowed to talk about it. That's the thing. If you're not allowed to talk about it, if you're not allowed to question something, that's when the red flags come up. It's like, okay, why don't they want us talking about this? Why don't they want us questioning the narrative? Is this actually dangerous to question the narrative? Who is this hurting? Oh, it only hurts the elite pedophile billionaires. Okay, well, that makes sense of why we're not allowed to talk about it now.
And I mean, you also wind up seeing certain shills and stuff like that, and certain kind of counterintelligence operations that are put out there. Like there's a term called jacking off, jack being just asking questions, JAQ.
Okay, yeah.
And going through and be like, and kind of using that as a way to demonize people that are, this doesn't really make sense to me. I just want to ask a few questions. And then you wind up kind of seeing this kind of pushback, just like the term conspiracy theorist was put out into the vernacular by the CIA for anyone that questioned the Warren Report.
Well, I think what's really dangerous about what big tech is doing is it not only affects people like me who are willing to tell the truth without censoring I mean, I had to censor a little bit, and I would go through my videos and say, okay, this is what I'm not allowed to say. If I want to keep my platform, I can say this or this or this. And it did end up I did end up having to self-censor myself. I had created several videos that never got published because YouTube would change their rules halfway through a controversy, like the election meddling. I had a good 30-minute video that I'm like, okay, I can't publish that. I mean, I might as well now. But it's the self-censorship, and it's the people, you know, who are making a lot of money on the platforms. Some big, what does Steven Crowder call it, big con. I think they're all kind of in bed with the advertisers because that's how they make millions of dollars, and they're not doing hard-hitting journalism at all because they're too afraid to, because they know that, okay, well, then they're going to lose their money and they're going to lose their company. And it's that threat of depersoning that keeps people in line. It's the threat of your livelihood that keeps people in line. Well, I don't rely on YouTube for my livelihood, so I don't care. It's like, go ahead, cancel me. I'm just going to keep popping up. I'm just going to keep making videos. And if eventually no one's watching, then I'll keep shouting into the void because someone has to.
Talking to the internet.
Yeah, I'll just talk to I don't know. I think at this point it's just something that I have to keep doing, and I'm so driven by spite and revenge that kicking me off a platform just makes me want to work harder. Okay, because it's like, okay, I'm that big of a threat, I'm over the target, then what I'm doing must be important and I should keep going.
Well, whatever keeps your head above water keeps you pushing forward, right?
Well, that's what they want. They just want people to give up, right? They want people to be depersoned. They want people to not be able to afford to continue. And yeah, it's pretty gross how big tech works, but it is the world we live in.
Well, the good news is that there's lots of open source video editing software, and a Blue Yeti snowball mic is like $100.
Yeah, anyone can do it, and I deeply encourage everyone to get out and do it. I mean, don't expect to. I mean, I was very lucky. I think that I was able to grow my platform the way I was, and I had been video editing since middle school. Like, this was just, these were talents that I already had accumulated, and I put them together and I created something, and as a combination of hard work and luck got me to where I was. But anyone can do it. Anyone who's willing to sit down and put the hours in and has the time to, you can do it.
You had talked about how there was right, a lack of kind of hard-hitting journalism and stuff like that in the mainstream. Do you think that there is, for lack of a better word, enemies from within, that there is people within the truth community, that there's people on the conservative right-wing side of things that are there to just muddy the waters and make people look like idiots by putting out misinformation?
I'm talking about like controlled opposition.
Yes. You don't have to name names.
No, I don't know. I don't know, because I don't really concern myself with that. If I see something that like just doesn't have validity to me, that it's being pushed out, like, okay, I know that the QAnon thing was big, especially a couple of years ago. It's not something that I ever really got into, because I'm just like, I'm still gonna get my source. I'm not gonna get my sources from just some anonymous person on 4chan. I'm going to go for direct sources. I'm going to file documents, and I'm going to continue to do it the way that I'm doing it. So no, I don't just believe everything and everyone that comes out. I need to verify it for myself first, and I have to know what the source is and where they're getting that information. So I don't concern myself really with other people or drama, and I think that internet drama is a distraction as well.
Oh, it absolutely is. Yeah, it absolutely is. And whether it's just going through and certain amounts of outrage porn to just make people feel helpless or make them angry, and it stops them from being productive.
Well, they want us infighting, and they want us confused, and they want, the narrative controlled. And I mean, look at who owns the fact checkers, right? And then you'll see, I was like, okay, I don't really trust that then.
Well, yeah, and they had Snopes doing it for a while, and when you go through and look into Snopes and some of the shady stuff in their background, it's fascinating.
Absolutely. I think you almost just want like autistic people to run everything because they don't have any, like, they're not incentivized the same way. Like Elon Musk, for example, is kind of just rogue, and he's on the spectrum, and he has his own kind of moral compass where he's not influenced the same way, because it's like, well, what are you going to do, bribe him? He's one of the richest men in the world. Like, he doesn't care. He's doing this for laughs at this point. I think he's just like, oh, it'd be funny if I bought Twitter. And then he did, and that pissed off a lot of people.
Or when
I'm not saying that Musk is the savior by any means, or that he's infallible, but I do like people who will interrupt the system. Same with like people like Donald Trump. It's like very obvious that the establishment did not want him in charge of anything, and that's why there was such a concerted effort to get rid of him and replace him with Joe Biden. So love him or hate him, it doesn't matter. It's like we need people to interrupt the World Economic Forum's globalist agenda, in my opinion.
With Trump, it was interesting for me because there was all this shade being tossed around, and I didn't know what was happening. So I'm actually one of the few Canadians that went down to a Trump rally in 2016. In 2016, I was at a rally in Manchester, New Hampshire, the night before he was elected.
It must have been exciting.
There was, I don't know, 28,000 people there. And I mean, like Manchester, New Hampshire is the size of like Medicine Hat, maybe. Like it's like 100,000 people, like tops. 50.
Yeah, and then you look at who was at Joe Biden's rallies. 5 old people that they paid to be there. And he's supposed to be the most popular president of all time, according to the votes. I just don't buy it. I just don't buy it.
What was interesting about Trump's rallies was there was everyone there. The one that I was at, there was everyone there. There was young gay kids, there was blacks, there's Hispanics, there was, women, there was children, there was the elderly, infirm, there was everyone was there. And I mean, with that said, there's going to be a certain amount of people that are just paid to be there and kind of like push the energy in the crowd. Like there's a certain amount of that that's going to happen. But everyone was there. And the ones that seemed to be the most fervent and the most passionate supporters of his weren't white. That was the thing that was interesting, because running into some of the people just like out and about before this rally in the afternoon, just kind of like saw guys just like got off the bus, is like, oh, hey bro, how you doing? And he's kind of chit chatting. He wasn't from there. And he's like, oh yeah, I just got into town. I'm from New York or from wherever and he was there just to be the rally. Donald Trump became this really, really interesting point that people rallied around. And
I think it's because he wasn't a career politician, right? And you look to him and he said things that politicians aren't supposed to say. He was a real person, and people could relate to that, and people can sense that. But you look at Kamala Harris and it's just like, she's not even a human, like the way she talks. It's like, who is this person? Like no one knows who this person is because they're manufactured.
Well, and I mean, they put her in there hoping to get, a whole bunch of the non-white vote.
She was a diversity hire, and that's what even Joe Biden said. Like, okay, I'm going to get a female just because she's a female and she's going to be brown. Like she's a diversity hire.
What was fascinating was if you look back in her career, the number of black people that were put in prison because of her policies.
She was California's top cop. She was so corrupt, and she only got to her position because she was sleeping with Willie Brown, I think was his name. Yeah, and I definitely made a joke about that in my January 6th video, and that probably didn't help with me getting canceled, but whatever. It is what it is, and I don't regret it. I don't regret anything.
Well, I mean, at least you entertain yourself the whole way through, right?
Yeah, I made myself laugh. I still watch my old videos, and there's jokes that make me laugh, and I'm like, okay, yeah, no, this is all right. This isn't so bad. Yeah, the only thing I wish is maybe I could have got one more year out of it to move everyone over to my Rumble channel, because that's what I feel sad about is I had the best community. I had a great community on YouTube, and I just hope that they're able to find me on Rumble or BitChute and follow me, because it's like making friends. It's like having a family that you in a community that you've cultivated for years, and they all support you. And it's losing that. That's the hardest part about it. I don't care about YouTube. I don't care about imaginary internet points. None of that matters. I'm anonymous anyway. No one knows who I am in my real life. That's all made up. I don't care about that. I don't care about any sort of money or financial gain. I barely had any with YouTube. All I cared about was the community, the support, and doing journalism and being able to put my art out there for people to see. And that's the sad part that I've lost.
In your personal life, do you ever broach any of these topics with people? Or is yelling into the internet your kind of outlet for it?
I think I have to kind of know the crowd. I guess I've just recently started getting into doing a stand-up comedy again, and I kind of it's kind of like you go into a room and you see who's in there and you look around and you're like, okay, is this appropriate to say to this crowd, or which joke should I use? What's going to hit the best with this demographic? It's kind of like that in real life too.
N95s are out there.
Yeah, it's like, can I joke about this here, or like how old is the population? Yeah, I think that's true when you broach anywhere where you go, and you can put in like some subtle, drop some like little red pills and see how they respond to know if you're gonna be able to have a conversation with that. But I'm a contrarian. I don't really care what people think about me, and I like to kind of stir things up. I like to debate with people, but I'm not going places to harass people, and I don't really care what other people's political beliefs are, because they're totally entitled to believe whatever they want. I think over time, though, you do lose friends and maybe some people in your family, especially when it came to COVID and everyone was so polarized about vaccinations. And in Canada with the trucker convoy, it's kind of like you had to pick sides. You're on one side or the other. You supported it or you didn't. And that kind of drew some lines in the sand for a lot of people. But I think also going through that, I've seen a lot of people switch sides too, from where they believed in the establishment narrative, they trusted big pharma, and now they're seeing the sudden deaths. And they said, wow, I really wish I would have listened to you, but I didn't,
Watching how COVID and everything like that unfurled was very, 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 very telling and an interesting look into the human psyche. As all those people that like to think that in 1930s Germany that they would have stood up and said no.
I talk about that in my next video that I'm working on right now about censorship. I say, all these people think that they would have been on the right side of history, quote unquote, but they aren't. They're the brown coats who burnt books. They're Chairman Mao's Red Army that tears down statues. They're the Stalin removing people from pictures for not towing the party line. They're the mob at the witch trials in Salem. There are canceling people for standing against authority. And that's the wrong side of history, right? That's anyone who cancels people, this is just historically is not on the right side of history.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you're the one who's putting your boot on someone's neck, it's never a good look. The other thing that was interesting to see was how quickly people used COVID as a convenient excuse to treat other people poorly.
Oh, absolutely. Like as soon as, or to call in your neighbors, that that was reminiscent of 1930s Germany that, we thought we'd hopefully never see again. Is that tattletale culture? Well, this person isn't listening to authority. Why do I have to do it if they're not doing it? Well, you don't have to do it. That's the thing. It's like if everyone stood against it, we wouldn't have to do it. But it got very scary of how angry people were getting for people who opposed authority. And it's not necessarily all their fault, because they were being lied to as well by the media and the government. How many of them told you that, oh, if you get the jab, all of this goes away, you won't get infected, you'll be safe? They were using fear, and at the time they were lying about the numbers too. They were propping this up to be a lot more terrifying than it was, and it was enough to get people to have our economy destroyed, because we are all in fear and we're all listening to the narrative. I mean, except for me, because I'm a conspiracy theorist, right? I'm like, no, this doesn't add up. I don't trust anything that they're saying.
A good buddy of mine was deployed with the military to do psychological operations, and he now works in emergency services. And when the COVID thing started popping off, he was hook, line, and sinker, toeing the line. And then I told him, I said, man, look at it again. I said, go back and look at it through the lens of psyops, of what you were trained to do. Go and look at it again. And so he starts looking into it. I said, it's all like, it's manufactured. This doesn't make sense, right? Go and look again. And what's interesting now is well, after a couple of weeks of looking at it, and he was going, like, he was in and out of the hospitals and stuff like that. He said, there's nurses that are damn near getting carpal tunnel on their thumbs from crushing candies on their phone.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
yeah, we were being totally lied to about everything. My son is a rare genetic disorder. He gets sick quite a bit and hospitalized quite a bit, and he was hospitalized with a respiratory infection. It wasn't COVID, in November 2020. So this was right when COVID was kind of popping off in Canada, and people were at the height of fear. And we're in the children's hospital, and I said, wow, you guys must be just so overrun with COVID. And they said, no, we haven't had a single case here at this hospital, because it doesn't affect children. And they were freaking us out, thinking that all our kids were going to die, and it just affected old people, really, at that time. But no, it didn't hit kids at all. And the fact that they're still pushing the vaccine and pushing it onto children is criminal, for, like, especially what we know now, what's coming out with the side effects. It's actually quite disgusting.
Well, when you went through and overbought doses,
yeah,
right, and now you have all the stockpile.
Like, well, and I talk about that in my what was it? My protest video, my trucker convoy video. I talk about how many doses did Trudeau buy? Why did he buy so many doses for I think it was enough for like 8 doses for every single person in Canada, and they have expiry dates. It's like, what are they pushing? Obviously that there's more going on here than we realize. Someone's making money off of this for sure, in a backdoor deal.
Well, and if you go through and you look at it, well, what happens if it's not used up? Well, it expires. Okay, but the issue becomes, if the doses aren't used and that taxpayer money was spent and the problem goes away, was it a problem? Why do we spend the money in the first place?
And that's one of the questions that I bring up. It's like, either they're like lying to us about, oh, you just get two doses and you're done, which I knew was a lie. I knew that they're going to push boosters on people, or they're wasting money for no reason. And obviously there's no reason to do something, right? So I think that there were some backdoor deals or some shares that some of these politicians owned. I don't know, but it's shady, and we may never know.
My favorite to come out of that was the mixing and matching of vaccines.
Well, if you have any sort of medical background, like I took courses on virology and pathology, and I'm like, I know how masks are supposed to work. I know how PPE protocol is supposed to be used, and they're just lying to us. They're just flat out lying to us about how viruses work, about how vaccines work, and I knew that I wasn't allowed to talk about any of that on YouTube, or I'd have my channel deleted. And that's that's the hard part. It's like even medical professionals were afraid of coming out and speaking about this because they were going to get fired. It's like listen to the experts, but only the experts that we've particularly hired to say exactly what we want them to say, that goes around with our narrative where we can keep making money.
It's interesting that you bring up people being fired, especially in the medical field. There was a guy that I interviewed. His name was Sean Taylor, and Sean Taylor was a part of the United Conservative Party out in British Columbia, in Kelowna specifically. He was a nurse. He was in the military. He actually deployed overseas with psychological operations with another friend of mine. And so I interviewed him, and the podcast that I did with him that had, I think it was 262 views when it was when it wound up getting grabbed. He was pulled into his reserve unit, the commanding officer of his reserve unit, his office, and he was fired from the military. And he was fired as a nurse, and is currently facing, it's like 7 or 8 charges from the College of Nursing in British Columbia over stuff that was said on that podcast.
Yeah, it's we live in a totalitarian country now in Canada. Honestly, we do not have free speech in Canada, and we haven't for a long time. And it's getting increasingly terrifying, especially for people who come out and say contrarian things on the internet, like me.
So when you come across somebody that doesn't buy it, they just want to keep their head in the sand, where is it that you start them?
Well, I don't really care, because that's up to them. Like, I'm not here to hold anyone's hand. It's like, no, you don't want to believe me? Fine. I'm not going to waste my time on you, kind of thing. Like, that's for you to figure out. Like, I'm not going to push my beliefs onto other people. They can wake up on their own or not. And like, I really love it though when I do get messages from people of like, hey, I shared your video with my mom, or like, you've red pilled me on this, or you've changed my girlfriend's mind, and you were very palatable to watch. Or yeah, my girlfriend really liked the cat, and we got in and we started watching it, and now she believes she believes this and this. And I think that's fun, but I'm not here to push things on people.
What I tend to tell people is, I don't know what's true and I don't know what's not, but I enjoy the type of content that you do and others do. I tell people, look at it as it's a revisionist history type of channel. It's a channel where it looks at as an intellectual exercise. What if it's actually something different than we're being told? What could that look like? And so I tend to suggest people just look at it as an intellectual exercise initially.
Well, I just say, just read the documents I'm presenting. Like, just do that. Just put 2 and 2 together like I did, right? Like, here's all the sources I've used. Here's why I came to those conclusions. And I think I do a fairly okay job of putting all that information together, and how I get to the conclusions that I do. I think it's hard to watch one of my videos and really dispute a lot of it, like, unless it's just an opinion piece, which is fine. But like, again, like, I have phone calls from Pfizer recorded. It's like, how do you dispute that? How do you dispute what Project Veritas is doing, right? They can't. That's why they have to cancel you. That's why they're scared of you. That's why you're dangerous, because they cannot win with debate. There's no way to fact check you and get away with that, because you're telling the truth, and the truth will always win. And so if they need to cover that up, that just shows that they they don't care about the truth.
Where is it you get the ideas from your videos, or sorry, for your videos?
You know, it depends on what's happening. I mean, there's some videos I have that really are not necessarily topical, like the Duplessis orphan things. I do like to cover like old government experiments. Those things are very interesting to me. But even with news stories now, I used to just cover everything, and I got kind of bogged down by it. And then I decided, you know what, if I'm going to be spending, 40 to 100 plus hours on each video, I need to be really interested in the topics. And there has to be enough interest to keep me wanting to do this till the end and seeing this project through. So I just pick whatever I think is interesting. If I'm interested and passionate about it, then I can make other people passionate about it too, I think.
That's a good way to approach it. If you go back to your younger self, what advice would you give? And it doesn't need to be related to this. If you go talk to you when you're 20, what would you say?
20. I would
Unless you are 20, and then.
No, I'm a little bit older than that. I'm in my mid 30s. Unfortunately, I started when I was in my 20s with the Truth Factory. I would say to never do anything out of guilt or pressure in order to live up to someone else's expectations.
That's solid.
Yeah, I think I would have avoided a lot of mistakes had I just had that advice. And also to buy Bitcoin. But
you're talking about autistic people. The guy who does my web stuff is an absolute 4chan spurg. He was telling me about Bitcoin was like $600. And I was like, yeah, like, I don't know, man. I don't even know where to buy it. Kind of seems like a waste of money. Right? Like,
I was gonna buy it at $60, and I just didn't. I was like, oh, that seems really complicated. I'm not gonna do it. But yeah, I always kick myself for that. But then you're like, how do I know I would have held on to it anyway, right? You'd probably go up to $100 and be like, oh, cool, I made $40. I'm gonna sell.
Well, and I mean, also you go through and you look at Bitcoin at that time, the exchanges and the number, whether it's FTX or Quadriga or any of the others that just. Right, like you could go through and put your money in there, but getting your money out was.
It was very complicated. Yeah, it's come a long way.
Well, it was also one of those things where I think it was Quadriga. There's a guy named Gerald Cotton, who's Canadian. It's an interesting story. I'll send you the link, where he just kind of built this thing up and then vanished with like billions of dollars, and it was all in crypto. It's a little
dangerous.
He wound up on things were starting to go south. He went over to India with his wife, and then died due to complications of Crohn's disease in India, which is apparently a fairly easy place to get your death certificate done. So yeah, it's a fascinating story. I'll send you a link to it.
All right.
What person in history do you go back or do you look back on and think fondly of as like, if I could live up to that, it's a life.
Okay. I think that there's a few people. I think like I really like Nikola Tesla. Actually, I think he was probably autistic as well, but I think he was a genius.
By all accounts, the man was an asexual and had a very strange affinity for pigeons.
Pigeons, yeah. I see. I don't even know if he was asexual. He was I think I might be misquoting this, but he said he was in love with a pigeon the way a man loves a woman. Very, very weird guy. One of my most popular videos was a Donald Trump time travel video. It was obviously all a joke and all satire. And it talks about Nikola Tesla and Donald Trump's uncle. There was grains of truth to it that made it actually quite funny and an interesting theory. And I think this university student doing their doctorate took my video and like wrote about how I seriously believed that Donald Trump was a time traveler. Like, I don't know. that exists somewhere
If
out
you can
there.
get people to believe your satire, that's amazing.
I guess so.
And then what quote do you find yourself looking upon regularly?
One I think is a good one is by Franz Kafka, and start with what is right rather than what is acceptable. Not everything that is acceptable in our society or what we're supposed to do is the right thing to do.
I like that.
Thank you. I like it too.
I'm just glad it wasn't live, laugh, love.
Yeah, no, do I seem like a live, laugh, love type of girl?
Well, I don't know, right? Like I bought this house. I bought a ranch out in rural Saskatchewan, and I go right, like I just whatever my guy. I'm like, yeah, looks good, bones are good, blah blah blah, and I move in, and so a gal that I had over, she's like points it out, and I was like, oh God, this was a live, laugh, love, potpourri, dance like no one's watching type of basic house. Amazing, just amazing.
You know what? Sometimes basic is fine. You know, it's basic because it's good, but I'm not a basic live, love, love girl.
One of my favorite quotes is, and I don't know who said it originally. I saw it scrawled in Sharpie marker in the inside of a bathroom stall in a truck stop somewhere. And it
Perfect.
said, I have no faith in man, for all are liars when it suits their purpose.
That's a good one, yeah.
Um, when people want to go through and poo-poo on conspiracy theories and just say that it's all made up and it's all out of whole cloth, the thing that I like to point out to them is it is not a conspiracy to think that people with money and power will want to do things to maintain or improve that position.
Oh, exactly. I think
Because,
a lot of people are just naive about how the world works.
well, and I mean human nature in general, right? And
Yeah.
and people with a lot of money and power are just playing on a bigger chessboard, right? Than someone who's a little closer to the bottom, right? Whether that person's looking at maxing out their 401k and their Roth IRA, or getting their TFSA pack topped up, or buying a few rental properties to improve their position, right? Well,
Well,
when you have billions
yeah.
of dollars, you play a little bigger.
Well, in my video that I made in January called "The Men Who Own Everything," I put a lot of work into that. So go watch it if you haven't seen it. "The Men Who Own Everything." I basically come to the conclusion that everyone, these billionaires, the people who are trying to control the world, a lot of them are probably sociopaths, and they kind of have to be in order to get to where they are. In order to be so cutthroat that they got to the top of their companies and get those big paychecks. So it's like, why would they stop there? And why do you think sociopaths like that would have our best interests at heart? Nothing they're doing is for us, it's for them, it's to maintain power, to stay in power. And do you think those people are going to stop where they're at, or do you think that they're going to keep controlling, elections and doing everything in their power? So that's how I look at them. I think of those people, they're actually probably evil. It's not just rich, there are just rich people who just like go live their lives on, I have nothing against them. I have the people who are using their money to influence what we do and trying to control us and trying to make us eat bugs against our will.
Yeah, it's definitely it's interesting, or I guess scary, right? Because I can appreciate that somebody, you know, it's not that they're against me, they're just in it for themselves. They want a bigger house. They want that, that extra $1 million. They want that nice
Yeah,
car.
I have no
All
animosity
that.
to people who have worked their butt off and made money and like built an empire. Good for them. Elon Musk, good for you. Whatever. Just don't make me eat bugs. That's all.
Absolutely. But when the goal is control, when it's just about control and power, and you wind up getting to see human nature fall into that stuff, on things as simple as condo boards.
Mm-hmm.
If you go through and you talk to somebody that lives in a condo and people that are on the condo board and people that go through and try to weasel their way into being a big wheel at the cracker factory, that's the condo board. Fascinating to watch how quickly somebody takes an interest in telling other people what they can do. And it starts to happen really quick. So I don't necessarily think that the people that are at the very top are the only ones that are sociopaths. I think that as you move up that ladder, you just see these tendencies of certain types of people just take shape on a grander scale.
That's true. That's true. You Milgram experiment, basically just hand someone a clipboard and a lab coat and see how they change, right? Or that the prison cop experiment that they did.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. And power breeds wanting to have more power for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, I've spent some time, unfortunately, working in a very corporate structure, and it's fascinating to watch how quickly the guy beside you will stab you in the back so the boss can copulate with the wound so they can get their key to that middle management bathroom. And it's just interesting to watch how quickly that happens. And to go back to what we talked about earlier, anyone that thinks that they would have stood up in 1930s Germany, or that they would have done something in East Germany, they wouldn't have reported on their neighbor. Well, we know the truth for a lot of them now, right?
Yeah, yeah. See how you reacted during a time of crisis.
What 3 to 5 books would you recommend that somebody reads? And it doesn't need to be, related directly to this. Just like what are your top 3 to 5 books?
I think for people who are getting into, I guess, who are trying to open their eyes to the things I've been talking about, I would actually recommend, and this is kind of a wild card one, The Great Reset by Alex Jones, because it's a very easy read and it's entertaining enough that even if you don't really like reading, you'll probably be able to get through this one.
Written in a nice 20-point font.
Yeah, yeah. It's a nice. They even have an audiobook. Just go listen to The Great Reset by Alex Jones, or watch my video, The Men Who Own Everything, because I cover a lot of it. Speechless by Michael Knowles is good. It's about kind of a censorship, a little bit of cancel culture, and the way we're headed. The Trial by Franz Kafka. Something I kind of felt like what happened with me with YouTube and being canceled was a little bit Kafka-esque, in a way that, like, they just canceled me and they wouldn't tell me why. There was no trial. There was no way that I could really rebut any of the charges that they placed against me that were all just made up, and it was all just this bureaucratic nonsense. But that's a good one. Animal Farm by George Orwell. I mean, it's a little bit cliche, but he's very anti-authoritarian. And this one, I don't know if I'm even allowed to say this, but I think everyone should read Ted Kaczynski's Manifesto. So yeah, that would be my 5 books that I'd recommend.
So I'm guessing that you and I grew up watching the same types of things on TV. Then you wound up seeing the Unabomber and remember seeing him when you were a kid on TV, and the drawings of this guy that was in some type of a hooded sweatsuit.
Yeah,
aviator sunglasses.
I found him a little bit later in life, but yeah, he was very, very much demonized. But you know what? A lot of things that he talked about, I think the way he went about things is not the way that I would as a pacifist, but a very brilliant man otherwise. And that it's funny. I don't know what we're allowed to talk about on a podcast. If I'm allowed to say that the Unabomber was brilliant, but obviously he was.
Well,
I mean, he was a math genius, right?
I find it interesting that we're at a stage in society in which we need to dismiss all of everyone's ideas because they had a few that were terrible. And yeah, I think going through and looking at somebody's ideas, regardless of where they came from, and just judging that idea based on its merit and not its origin is worth doing.
Well, yeah, if we put up a magnifying glass over everyone's history, you know, going back 20, 30 years, you have to cancel everyone. You have to tear down every statue. Where would you stop? And that's a problem with where we're headed with cancel culture, is just like no one is immune. And it's just a tool. It's just a tool to cancel people. No one actually cares. No one will care tomorrow. No one cared a week ago. They just care now because it's a tool to be used by the establishment. So
it's interesting to see how cancel culture only applies to some. Like as an example, the current President Biden, when you look at him in the 90s, he's
egregious racism. Yeah,
like
he's the reason for the black, black versus white, crack versus cocaine disparity, and the reason for the prison system and the way it is. And yeah, absolutely, I made videos about that. Or even Justin Trudeau calling, you know, the trucker convoy racist. Well, it's like the pot calling the kettle blackface, right?
Oh, it was fascinating. Or when he went through and tried to go through and say someone was standing with Nazis, and they wound up being Jewish, which he should have been able to tell if they were from the Richmond Hill riding in Toronto, and had Holocaust survivors in their family. Like, brutal, but no apology for that.
No, of course not.
Kat, this has been great. I thank you for being so generous with your time. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so I am on BitChute and I'm on Rumble. You can just search The Truth Factory. I have also just launched my own website at truthcat.com, and I'll have links to everything and ways that you can support me. And I'll be posting videos there as well, just in case something happens to me in the future. So yeah, if you like this interview and you want to hear more, follow me there, please.
So your URL is what? It's truthcat.com,
or truthcat.com.
Truthcat.com, and we'll have that below. Have you are you going to get on the Instagram train or no?
I'm thinking about it. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Twitter right now, and I'm thinking about, yeah, maybe TikTok too. Maybe just putting on some funny little clips, some zingers. Yeah, I might get on the Instagram train.
Instagram's going Instagram's going to bat against TikTok, and everything is very favorable for short form content like reels and stuff like that. TikTok is you'll get canceled real fast on TikTok, and it's not worth it when you start looking at what their terms of service are.
All right. Well, I'm gonna think about what I'm gonna do with my channel. Again, I'm just one person doing all of it. People, I think that I have a team. I don't. It's just me. So I don't have social media management or anything. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm gonna try my best to get out there and reach out to the community.
Literally, if you just cross-posted what you put on Twitter, on Instagram, you'd be off to a good start.
Perfect. That sounds good.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kat.
Thank you.